There was this fear that it could escalate into a wider war, it could pull in other nations, it would have second and third order effects on the global economy, on the trade routes, the sea lanes. The good part is that the war has not expanded beyond Gaza. Houthi militia in Yemen, which is yet another parastate organization, quite like Hamas and Hezbollah and some of the others, with a large territory which it commands, has started launching attacks on the shipping lanes which run through the Red Sea. The Houthis are supposed to be proxies of Iran, quite like the Hezbollah and the Hamas. The Americans have now launched what they call the Operation Prosperity Guardian. Majors in the shipping industry have announced that they are now going to avoid these waters of the Red Sea, and they're going to take that longer route. I think it has seriously compromised America's standing in the world. When the October 7th terror attacks happened in Israel, there was a fear that Israel would of course retaliate, but there was this fear that it could escalate into a wider war, it could pull in other nations, and things could simply spiral out of control. And then if the war became a wider war, then it would have second and third order effects on the global economy, on the trade routes, the sea lanes, what have you. Now 2.5 months after the October 7 terror attacks on Israel, the war continues in Gaza, but the good part is that the war has not expanded beyond Gaza. There have been the odd skirmishes, on the northern side of Israel, on the border with Lebanon. There have been some strikes in Syria, but more or less the battlefield has been contained to Gaza. But over the last few weeks, there has been a very troubling development, which could still lead to a wider war, which could actually pull in countries from around the world into the conflict zone, but not in the way that we had anticipated in the early days of that terror attack. What has happened is that the Houthi militia in Yemen, which is yet another parastate organization, quite like Hamas and Hezbollah and some of the others, with a large territory which it commands, has started launching attacks on the shipping lanes which run through the Red Sea, and in particular around the tiny stretch of sea which is called the Bab al-Mandab Straits, from where a bulk of the shipping which goes through the Suez Canal passes. In fact, the entire shipping which goes through the Gulf of Suez and then onto the Suez Canal, into the Mediterranean and on to markets in Europe, that has now come under attack from the Houthi militias. Now the Houthis are supposed to be proxies of Iran, quite like the Hezbollah and the Hamas, but what is very concerning is that because of there have been more than around a dozen attacks. These have been a couple of missile attacks on commercial ships. There have also been drone attacks or attempted drone attacks on commercial shipping. A couple of ships have been hijacked. There are these commando operations where people have landed onto the ship and then hijacked it and taken it to a port in Yemen. The Americans have now launched what they call the Operation Prosperity Guardian. It's basically meant to deter the Houthis, but the Houthis, like many of the other parastate organizations, don't seem to be very impressed with what the Americans are trying to do, and in fact have dared the Americans to bring it on. Although the Houthis are saying that basically their attacks are aimed at the shipping which is going into Israel. They want to deny the sea lanes to Israel because the ships go to the Israeli port of Eilat, and they are not interested in molesting the other shipping which passes through these waters. Some of the global majors in the shipping industry have announced that they are now going to avoid these waters of the Red Sea, and they are going to take that longer route along the Cape of Good Hope and then on to Europe from that side, which adds many thousands of miles to the shipping which goes from Asia to Europe, and adds to the cost, and as a result we have seen oil prices going up. We have seen it could lead to supply disruptions, and some of the worst fears which were attached to a wider war could actually be unfolding. The Americans have of course announced this operation, but the point is, what exactly are they trying to do? If they are merely trying to deter the Houthis, I have certain doubts whether they will be very successful in doing that, because frankly, way back, almost 10 years back, the Saudis and the UAE launched military operations against the Houthi rebels, as they were called at that point of time, after they had dislodged the government in Yemen and taken over power. But those military operations have not really led anywhere, and despite carpet bombing, despite massive attacks, the Houthis have managed to hold their own. So are they going to be impressed by the Americans and some of their allies, and are the Americans and some of their allies ready to ratchet up the military operations to a point where they actually degrade the Houthi capabilities and manage to restore order to the shipping lanes in these very crucial waters? And that's a very, very big question mark. But I think what is equally important is the fact that the growth of these parastate organizations, and we are seeing them in many places. We've seen that in the form of Hamas, Hezbollah, of course the Houthis, but then we are seeing some of these parastate organizations which are basically a kind of the next stage of terror organizations in other parts of Africa as well. We are seeing that in Somalia and many other places. Now, I think this is a grave challenge to international security, because while states can be deterred, while states have very identifiable targets, military targets which can be aimed at and which can be taken out, which can be dissuaded, states have a lot to lose. Many of these parastate organizations really don't have so much to lose in ways that the states have to lose, and some of them can afford to be far more extreme, and frankly, if they are willing to lose enough people and they show the kind of staying power as indeed the Taliban have shown, then there is a lot they can do to actually deter the states or global powers than many of the states can do. What is even more interesting is that while states would be very reluctant to dare or defy openly a superpower like the United States, some of these parastate organizations really don't give, are not really impressed with American capabilities, and are in fact they are ready to take on the superpowers for whatever their firepower may be, but they are ready to take on the superpowers. this is something which should worry many of the countries of the region, including India, which has a lot to lose. After all, a bulk of our energy comes from the Middle East, using some of these very same shipping lanes, and a lot of our trade flows through these waters onto Europe and other markets in the world. So I think we need to be very, very careful about what's happening, and apparently this was part of the conversation that Prime Minister Modi held with his Israeli counterpart, Prime Minister Netanyahu, on this very important issue. So there is of course going to be a question whether India, which claims to be a net security provider in the region, which is looked up to as one of the stabilizing forces in the region, whether India will also become part of this military operation. But India normally has been reluctant to be part of such multilateral military operations, but even so, I think India does need to do something about it, because it affects India's own interests. Also, there is now going to be a major challenge for the Americans, because there is a growing credibility gap on American capabilities, American promises, and America's ability to deliver on the ground as far as global security is concerned. The past track record of the Americans over the last few years has left a lot to be desired. I think it has seriously compromised America's standing in the world, and so a lot of people will be actually looking to see how far the Americans are ready to go in ensuring that some kind of stability is restored in this region. What is also important is that in some ways the Americans are being hoisted on their own petard. This kind of wokeism which has taken over American foreign policy was reflected in the way the American system reacted to the war that was being waged in Yemen by the Saudis and the UAE, who were not inclined to accept the Houthis who had displaced the government in Yemen. And there was a lot of criticism by the woke American media, by American commentators, by American strategists, some of it for good reasons, that had the Saudis and the Emiratis thought this through. But those very same reasons will also be raised when the Americans, with such great fanfare, announce this kind of a coalition of the willing, if you will, which will try and deter the Houthis. So I think what we have to give the credit where it is due, people like the the current Saudi Prime Minister, then Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and of course the UAE under the leadership of Mohammed bin Zayed, probably understood what was happening in Yemen and were not ready to accept it, and they were ready to take this to the next level to ensure that there was a modicum of stability in a country like Yemen, which is located in a very crucial geography, considering that it straddles the Red Sea and even to some extent the Persian Gulf. And yet they found no support from the international community, or if the Americans did back them up to a point, it was done much more surreptitiously than openly. But now those chickens are coming home to roost. You have the Houthis who are now taking on this mantle of being the fighters who will try and bring some kind of a solution to what is happening in the battlefield in Gaza, and use their leverages on the sea lanes to ensure that. So it's a very dangerous situation going forward. We'll have to wait and see whether these attacks cease or whether they escalate, and the fact that the kind of technologies that are being used, that are being deployed, the innovations which is being made to the launching of rockets and drones, or suicide drones as they are called, and the fact that many of these parastate groups have access to these technologies and these weapon systems, does add to the kind of threats which are increasing as far as global security is concerned, and global trade is concerned. So what happens next in the Middle East is going to have a major impact on global trade, but also on India and her energy security, our trade relations, and a range of other things. So I think it's very important to wait and watch how these things unfold, and to also evaluate what role India can play, even if it's probably at the level of an observer, because I think our armed forces, our security forces need to understand the new threats that are evolving on a daily basis. Many of these threats which somewhere down the line could start impacting our security in our immediate neighborhood, and perhaps even within our own country. This includes the kind of weapon systems that are being used, the kind of tactics and technologies that are being used by some of these terrorist groups and parastate organizations. So I think this is a very critical time which we are entering into, and we'll have to wait and see what 2024 brings. As things stand, it does not look that 2024 is going to be any better than 2023 as far as regional and global security is concerned.